What's a time where all they had to do was ask instead became a bigger deal than it should have? Story 1. In law school, we did a big mock settlement negotiation. Each person had a goal they wanted and a minimum they would compromise for. I was playing the victim who was going to get a settlement payout. I wanted money, but my assigned minimum was that I was not going to walk away without an apology. That was all I really wanted. The negotiations spiraled and dragged on into a standstill because despite it costing them nothing, nobody on the other side was willing to give an apology. Everyone was too worried that an apology might look like admitting fault or giving ground. In reality, it would have given them everything they wanted. It was probably one of the most important lessons I learned in law school. Don't get so hung up on the argument and details that you forget that the people you are dealing with are people, usually people who are stressed out and hurting. Story 2. Was crashing with a friend for a month. He has a big house, he's basically family. I'm his kid's godparent. I live 8,000 miles away in another country, so yeah. Wasn't being that guy, just a guy trying to spend time with my guy and his family. 2 weeks in, he's being really fucking weird, and it turns out he had all these expectations that he never communicated, namely bringing the trash out for them and walking with him and his daughter to and from pre-K in the mornings and afternoons. I cooked for them, I read to her, etc. I wasn't a slouch of a guest, and I was like, dude, all you had to do is ask. Turns out he'd been stewing on this for weeks. We laughed about it, but it was a pretty sealed convo. Story 3. When I graduated high school, I received a scholarship to study abroad in Germany for 1 year and live with a host family. After the honeymoon phase passed, my host mom was on the phone every week with the organization that sponsored me complaining about things I did that she didn't like. For example, throwing away school papers in the small receptacle in my bedroom. I never put food trash or anything other than recyclable paper in the bin, which, for the record, was already there when I moved in. The family said I could use their house phone whenever I wanted to call my fellow American friend who was on the same scholarship. Apparently, I was abusing this privilege. These are just a few examples. It was definitely not a language barrier issue since she spoke fluent English. The sponsor threatened to send me home, so I called them and explained to them that she wasn't communicating her issues to me directly. I was none the wiser that I was doing anything wrong until my sponsor would tell me so. Thankfully, they finally listened and told host mom to start talking to me about her issues directly and that they weren't going to take any more phone calls from her. Story 4. I clean houses for a living and I try to be communicative with my clients, but especially people who have never had help before tend to feel weird asking for certain things. Ms. B had us for almost a year when she finally showed me a list of all the things I've missed or not known. She is there when we clean. She could have told me at any time, but chose to bottle her frustrations up. I had to talk her down from canceling her services and told her, I'm also a human. I miss things. So does helper. But we are always happy to correct it before we leave, and going forward if we know. And somehow we haven't had any issues since. Just talk to me. Story 5. My mother-in-law being really passive-aggressive about not getting to spend time with her grandbabies. She's got an autoimmune disease, but I still able to keep a really busy schedule in her 60s all over town. She'll passively say to my father, in-law, or sister-in-law that she's mad she doesn't get more time with her grandkids. She could just talk to us directly and we could work something out, but hearing it through a grapevine is super annoying. Also, it's 100% her schedule, but she doesn't realize that her schedule doesn't really allow for a lot of grandkids' time. She's usually got meetings or volunteering through most of the day, and is upset the babies are asleep by 7:30. Story 6. I'm a professor. The end of course paper is worth a significant part of the grade. It's a case study with a kind of prescriptive format. While I think I've been clear about my expectations, I'm definitely looking for the information to be organized and presented in a specific way. Through the past few months, we've had a few zero-point deliverables for them to submit outlines and working drafts for comment. About half the class hasn't turned in anything. No big deal. It's not for a grade. It's literally just an opportunity to get some feedback. Up until the week that the papers are due, I'm so eager to provide feedback. I very much feel like I'm willing to help them as much as I can up until it's due. All they need to do is ask. Now that the course is about to close, I'm getting the sense that a few students are starting to panic. The papers are due next week, and I've had a few students reach out asking for me to read their 10-plus page drafts and ask for extensions. I'm for sure not taking time away from my family over the Thanksgiving holiday because you haven't planned ahead. I genuinely don't think I could have made myself any more available over the lead up to the due date. It's due when it's due. If a student didn't take advantage of the past month and they turn in a lemon of a final product, tough shit. Story 7. This is a really dumb one. I work at a food production facility. The company generously provides plastic silverware for the break room. Recently, they have been cracking down on labor costs and product waste. Essentially, we are losing money because of the economic slump, and they are trying to trim the fat. One day, the plastic silverware ran out in the lunchroom. It ended up being out for a week. A bunch of employees took this as a sign of the company cutting cost, and they can't afford silverware anymore, that we all need to start looking for new jobs as it is going under. Some were claiming that the company doesn't care for the employees and are trying to make the break room inhospitable. Y'all know. On told the managers we were out. All I did was literally ask the manager why there wasn't silverware in the break room. And he was like, "Oh, you're out? I'll order more." Story 8. Worked at a health benefits company and one of the clients was the NBA. An employee needed to fax eligibility records over a secured line and fucked it up. Instead of asking about why the number didn't match where it was supposed to go, where it did go was a law office. Law office contacted the NBA lawyered up, and the company got sued. Rightfully so. And in hindsight, the law office did a fantastic job handling the situation. Kobe Bryant's SSN just randomly going out where it shouldn't. Oh, and we lost NBA as a client. Story 9. When Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos with the claims they'll be able to do every test on a drop of blood, and all her investors just believed her. If anybody would have asked who in the hospital currently does the tests, let's ask some of them how plausible this is. We'd be able to explain the interferences, quality control, and all the other reasons it's snake oil. There's plenty of huge companies who manufacture analyzers, and one of them would have done something similar by now, but still probably using reagents so they can make money. Story 10. A few years ago, a taxpayer got a letter saying he owed a ton of money, and he needed to send documents in. These letters are 100% automated and automatically assigned to auditors. This guy calls me one day, flipping his lid, just screaming at me. Won't let me get a word in at all. He slams the phone down, calls again, yells more. He repeated this 3 times. Then I refused to pick up. 52 calls later, security and IT intercept and pulls his number. For 3 days, they required me to walk out with a police officer because of his threats. So, why did he get a letter? He entered his income incorrectly and added several zeros. All we needed was a copy of his W-2, which was written in the letter. Story 11. I used to have this guy on my team who refused to ask for time off. He would instead plan a vacation and just call in sick every day. I don't like to ask for doctor's notes, but I have to if someone is calling out day after day after day. So I would check in with him. By this point, he would be sick for several days straight. Then he would then get pissed off and explode into a rant about how I never give him vacation. He accused me of playing favorites, citing that I let such and such go to Disney last month, and I let someone go to Europe for a couple weeks over the summer. And he never gets that same concession. And every time I would ask the same question, why didn't you just ask for the time off? Because it's bullshit. I have my time. I should be able to use it however the fuck I want. I agree, so why can't you just do that? Why can't you just say which days you need for vacation? Why must we create conflict? How exactly is trying to skirt a very basic PTO procedure and suspiciously calling in sick every day did a week easier than just submitting your vacation time like everyone else? I never got a legitimate answer, just hemming and hawing about how everything is bullshit and somehow rigged against him. The really shitty part is he would have legitimate sick days, but because of how he tried to abuse his sick time, we had to be on top of it if he started to do 2 days in a row, etc. And he always acted like people were being unreasonable with him. Fortunately, he was gone not long after that. Story 12. When I was married, my husband was friends with a guy named Jake. We would sometimes hang out with Jake and his family, but I could never seem to fit in no matter how hard I tried. One of Jake's daughters was about 12 years old, named Lacey. One day, 3 years after I'd met them all, we'd been hanging out with the family for the day. On the way home, out of nowhere, my husband absolutely rips me a new one because it turns out Lacey's name was actually Lace, and I'd been calling her the wrong name for 3 years, and everybody thought I was a complete ass because of it. Apparently, for 3 years, they'd been dropping hints that this kid's name was Lace, and I just kept calling her Lacey, and everybody was sick of it and thought I was a complete and utter bitch. Like, WTF. 3 years they let this resentment fester. Hi, Lacey. How's school going? Actually, it's Lace, but school's going good. At no point in the preceding 1,095 days did that super simple conversation happen. Why? We got divorced not too long after that, so I never saw Lace again anyway. Story 13. Working on a group project in college, this was kind of a shitty project because it needed to be built one piece at a time. So person A did some work, and we met up. He was mad we hadn't done anything. We literally couldn't until he was done. So he went and talked to the professor and got special permission to not only leave our group, so now it's 2 people in ours, but join another, so they have 4. He then made it a point to tell us we couldn't use his code, software development. Well, we went to the professor and made our case. Yeah, you can use his code. I just told him that so you 2 would come talk to me. So he was super pissed we used his code. The real kicker is his code was so bad, I had to redo it all anyway. I spent all spring break working on that ass of a project. Story 14. Maybe not exactly the same thing, but my supervisor had an unofficial policy that if you got all your work done and communicated with her, you could leave a little early each day for doc appointments, other obligations, etc. It was a level of flexibility and professional trust that really helped with morale. But a couple of people started taking advantage of it and would just leave whenever they felt like it or were done with their work for the day without communicating, which is the only thing our supervisor asked for. So, unfortunately, she had to go back to the official policy, which is everyone has to stay in the office on the clock for their entire shift, and any request to leave early had to be formally submitted and approved as PTO days in advance, save for emergencies. Supervisor literally said all they had to do was ask me. That was my only rule. Story 15. 2 weeks ago, I went to a concert with my friend, Lily, and her friend, Grace. Got some vibes from Grace at the concert, so I asked Lily if I had been mentioned between them 2 at all because I didn't want to read into it too much, and they were really close friends and live on the same property and hang out daily. She said I hadn't come up, but she would be willing to get any info from me and even wingman to try and make it happen. I was like, cool. Grace and I made plans to go to another concert, just the 2 of us in a couple of days, and I'm sure I'll figure it out then, but I'll let her know. Fast forward a couple of days, and it turns out we did like each other and match each other's energies completely. We spend the weekend together at my place and wake up Monday to both of us being blocked by Lily. Turns out Lily had a thing for Grace and was trying to rope her into a throuple with her and her husband. She didn't tell me this. She didn't tell Grace this, and Grace isn't interested in her like that anyway, even though she is bi and poly. She thought she was just a really good friend and didn't realize Lily had other intentions. I obviously had no clue either. If Lily had just told me when I first asked about Grace, I would have backed off out of respect for my best friend. But I'm glad she didn't say anything because Grace and I are basically inseparable at this point. But I feel like I lost a close friend over an easily avoidable situation. Lily has been nasty and mean to Grace in the time since, and made her home life pretty uncomfortable. So Grace has been happily chilling at my place most of the time, which I'm sure is just making Lily more upset at the both of us. She still hasn't spoken to me about it. I only found out by asking her husband why I was blocked on all socials. Story 16. Literally this past semester for one of my college courses. My group had to make a presentation for a chapter in the book we had to read. Only we didn't know for certain what chapter we were doing. I suggested just emailing the professor and asking, but the other 3 members were like, no, then he'll know we haven't started it. So I did email the professor and he literally answered it with, "You are doing this chapter number." Literally fixed the problem with a single email. Story 17. We remodeled our back garden about 10 years ago. There were some complaints about planning, but we were found to be within our rights for all the work we wanted to do. The wall between our garden and our neighbors was about 1 meter high at the top of the garden. We used to chat with our neighbor over the wall regularly, so I didn't want to change that dynamic. One day I heard raised voices and went out to find my neighbor arguing with the brickie who was rebuilding the wall. When I arrived, the brickie asked me how high I wanted the wall. I said, "Keep it the same height as it was. Just not falling down like it was," hoping to get a smile. My neighbor snorted, glared at me, then walked off. Later that afternoon, a handwritten note came through the door telling us to never speak to him again, unless it was through a solicitor. He hasn't spoken to us since. Turns out he wanted to do his garden and make it a bit more private. He wanted a higher wall of 2 meter. If he'd just said that at the time and asked, we'd have built the wall to the height he wanted, and just charged for the extra material and work. Instead, he's now a sad, lonely old man who skulls back into the house whenever he sees us. Story 18. I used to do document review for large legal actions like major mergers, acquisitions, and class action lawsuits. When Comey busted out with news that more Hillary Clinton emails had been found on another computer that one of Clinton's campaign advisors had borrowed from her husband, the first thing I said was, "They're all going to be duplicates." Anyone who has done document review of email accounts would know this. All Comey had to do was ask someone who had actually been doing the reviews, and they could have told him that. Story 19. Happens in prison all the time. Can't really blame them. I was a bit of an anomaly as a corrections officer. Had a bachelor's, etc. Min-rec is GED. You'd have some 5'0" rookie frothing at the mouth because an inmate passed an item. So the sergeant has us tear dudes' cell apart because he was passed a shot of coffee from his neighbor. It's a mix of not giving a heads up, and technically it is against the rules, but I never bothered with pro-social behavior. I wasn't there to keep them from making their time manageable. I saw the job as keeping them away from the public and from each other. I worked in a living unit, and I was very honest about the situation. There's 3 of us and up to 250 of them at any given time. We aren't going to catch everything. Probably didn't catch most things, but I did eliminate unnecessary issues by being lenient on some things. 5 extra minutes on the phone? Sure. Give your neighbor a soup? Why not? I even understood haircuts to a point. Tattoos were a hard no due to the constant medical headaches they cause. Some, actually many, would say that I was compromised by showing a little humanity. That they're abusing me for 5 minutes extra on the phone. To me, it was just giving them rope if they were abusing it for nefarious means. Maybe, but I bet the majority just wanted 5 more minutes to speak to their loved ones the 2 times a day they get to. I always kept records of anything I did or any pass I gave, so if they turned up with something foul, I can go to the investigations team and have them check the recordings with times and dates. This is all a really long way to say that in prison, as long as I knew what was going on, I'd let a lot slide because passing food or sharing a meal in the day room doesn't hurt shit. Just give me a heads up or ask. Story 20. This is kind of a different one, but in the same spirit. I played over half of Resistance Fall of Man, PS3 launch title, without jumping because I never tried to. I had been playing a ton of Time Splitters, Future Perfect where you can't jump. It was just kind of ingrained into my head that that wasn't a possibility, and so when I started playing Resistance, I'd see things that I had to jump to get to, weapons, health, etc., and just think, must be some kind of secret or mechanic I'll get later making it accessible on New Game Plus. Finally, I got to a portion of the game where I had to jump to progress and was so confused. I had figured out other jumps I thought they were puzzles earlier in the game, but was just stumped on this one. I thought maybe there's something to interact with, and the prompts just aren't showing up. So I walked around, pressing square. One of the times I randomly hit X and was just dumbfounded as I did the most basic thing with the most basic button. The rest of the game became much easier. Story 21. I used to work as a supervisor at a water park. On all the slides, top and bottom, there were signs and a recording in multiple languages saying, "Remove all loose articles before riding." Of course, every day people wouldn't heed the signs, the recordings, or the lifeguards, and they'd go down with loose cash, sunglasses, and other assorted articles of the loose and/or valuable variety. For many attractions, it was as easy as the bottom lifeguard walking up a slide and picking things up in 6 or less water, no problem. However, other slides had pools that you'd shoot out into. Very dangerous to have people in the water, so we couldn't look for things without stopping the dispatch, which meant the line would get longer and people would complain. Our usual SOP was that we would stop the dispatch if the line was short, and/or we hadn't stopped recently. Neither the supervisor or the guard would dive and retrieve any lost articles. Those articles were supposed to be delivered to our guest services to be logged for stats of items lost and claimed. But I was generally cool if someone gave an explicit description of the article. One day, I was at the bottom of a ride with a catch pool monitoring the dispatch, and a guy came down, lost his glasses that were on his head, and he immediately turns around and starts diving for them himself. The guard is yelling, I start yelling. We stop dispatch when it's clear he isn't listening, and almost gets clobbered twice. This pool had a pretty wicked water current, so the guy had no idea what he was doing and clearly couldn't see them, so he finally comes out. He now locks onto me yelling at him, and with the supervisor outfit on, and starts laying into me about his $300 Ray-Bans that I'd better get for him right now. I let him yell me back a few steps to clear the water and line and resume dispatch, and I explained to him that what he did was incredibly dangerous, and the priority is his safety. Sunglasses are easy to retrieve once he's cleared. He wasn't hearing a word. Screaming, 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 threats and hand gestures. Another supervisor had come over to back me up and called security. They arrived and basically told him to shut up or he'd be escorted out. I told him I'd be happy to get his glasses, I just needed him to clear the exit and disengage so that I could get in the water. Nope, still screaming. My manager makes it out from her office, sort of pushes me out the way and gets his attention, and I get in the water. Unfortunately, his Ray-Bans got extremely scratched up from the bottom of the pool, and the lenses were basically ruined. If only he'd just exited the pool and asked or actually held onto them in the first place.